Today, I'm going to walk you through the American fantasy adventure comedy film Gulliver's Travels. Sit back, relax, and enjoy! The story starts with Lemuel Gulliver, a middle-aged man living in a messy New York apartment. His goofy personality shines as he talks to his superhero toys and dances in the shower. Gulliver works in the mailroom of a New York newspaper company, where his life seems stuck in a rut. One day, Gulliver meets a new employee, Dan, who quickly befriends him. Gulliver is Dan's boss in the mailing department, but despite this, no one in the office respects him. As they deliver mail, they pass by Darcy Silverman, a journalist Gulliver has secretly admired for years. Although he's been in love with her, he's never mustered the courage to confess. Later, Dan surprises everyone by announcing that he has been promoted to head of the mail department on his very first day. This news deeply upsets Gulliver, who has worked there for 10 years without recognition. Dan mocks him, claiming he's too scared to change his life or step out of his comfort zone. Feeling defeated, Gulliver notices Darcy still working late in her office. Summoning all his courage, he decides to talk to her and maybe even ask her out. But when he gets there, his nerves take over. Instead of confessing his feelings, he grabs a random paper from her desk and leaves awkwardly. Darcy stops him and suggests he apply for a travel writing assignment. Caught off guard, Gulliver nervously agrees and realizes he has to submit a travel blog the next day. At home, Gulliver struggles to write the blog and ends up copying and pasting articles from the internet. The next day, he submits it to Darcy, who is impressed with his writing skills and gives him a new assignment. She asks him to travel to the Bermuda Triangle and write about the mysterious legends of disappearing ships. Eager to impress Darcy, Gulliver agrees. She arranges everything, including a contact and a boat for the trip. The following day, Gulliver flies to Bermuda, where he's greeted by a man who shows him the rented automated boat and how to operate it. Confidently, Gulliver sets sail alone. At first, the journey is smooth. Gulliver enjoys the ride, reading magazines about building robots and drinking several cans of Coke. Eventually, he falls asleep. Hours later, he wakes up to find a massive wave in front of him. A fierce sea storm begins, and Gulliver hurriedly puts on a life jacket. The boat shakes violently as he notices an enormous sea tornado heading straight toward him. Before he can react, the boat is sucked into the tornado and pulled into its eye. Everything goes dark. When Gulliver wakes up, he finds himself unable to move. Looking down, he's shocked to see tiny men standing on his chest. Their leader introduces himself as Commander Edward Edwardian of Lilliput. As the camera pans out, we see a crowd of tiny people surrounding Gulliver, who is pinned to the ground with ropes and wooden stakes. Commander Edward calls him a beast. Scared and confused, Gulliver yells and easily breaks free from the tiny ropes, leaving the Lilliputians stunned. Believing he's dreaming, Gulliver closes his eyes, hoping to wake up. Commander Edward, however, orders his soldiers to subdue the beast. The tiny soldiers use hooks to pull Gulliver down, causing him to pass out. When Gulliver regains consciousness, he finds himself tied to a cart being pulled into the kingdom of Lilliput. Tiny civilians gather to catch a glimpse of the giant. He is brought to the royal palace and presented to King Theodore. The king's daughter, Princess Mary, feels sorry for Gulliver and questions whether the restraints are necessary. Edward insists that Gulliver is a spy from their enemy kingdom, Blefuscia. Gulliver, finally speaking, asks where he is. King Theodore's secretary, Jinx, proudly announces that Gulliver is in Lilliput, the greatest nation in the world. Convinced it's a prank, Gulliver calls out for the non-existent cameraman. Soon after, he is imprisoned in a cave, where he meets another prisoner, Horatio. Horatio reveals that Edward sentenced him to life imprisonment for courting Princess Mary. Edward arrives and overhears the two referring to him as lame ass. Furious, Edward demands an explanation. Gulliver quickly lies, saying lame ass means someone who is brave. Pleased with the answer, Edward takes them to a field, where Gulliver is forced to plow using his strength while restrained by a machine. Suddenly, the palace bell rings twice, signaling an attack from Blefuscia. Blefuscia launches an attack on Lilliput, attempting to kidnap Princess Mary and setting the palace on fire. Edward rushes to the scene but orders everyone to stay back, wanting to save the princess himself. However, Horatio urges Gulliver to act, knowing Edward won't reach her in time. Gulliver steps in, easily defeating the Blefuscian soldiers and rescuing the princess. Meanwhile, King Theodore and his secretary are trapped in the burning palace. In a desperate move, Gulliver urinates on the fire, putting it out and saving the king. Though unconventional, his bravery earns applause from the Lilliputians. Grateful, the king releases Gulliver and Horatio from imprisonment and declares a grand feast that evening to celebrate. However, Edward seethes with jealousy as Gulliver receives all the praise. At the feast, the king asks Gulliver about his homeland. Gulliver mentions Manhattan, and the people assume he was its president due to his courage. Emboldened by their admiration, Gulliver embellishes his story, claiming to be President the Awesome. The Lilliputians are in awe, though Edward remains skeptical. The next day, the people of Lilliput construct a massive house for Gulliver, complete with luxuries he could never afford in New York. They even build a theater where Gulliver stages a drama based on Titanic, claiming it's the story of his life. The audience is captivated by his tragic past. When Edward questions how Gulliver survived the sinking, he casually replies that he was resuscitated. Later, Horatio approaches Gulliver for help in impressing Princess Mary. Gulliver agrees, ready to lend a hand. Gulliver helps Horatio approach Princess Mary at the palace. Hiding nearby, Gulliver whispers the lyrics to the song Kiss, which Horatio repeats. By the end of the conversation, the princess starts to develop feelings for Horatio. However, their moment is interrupted by Edward, who arrives to court her. Edward, considered the bravest in Lilliput, is destined to marry Princess Mary, even though she dislikes him and can't escape the arrangement. Meanwhile, a search party discovers Gulliver's washed-up boat with Coke cans nearby. Gulliver finds his phone and realizes it still works. He listens to 12 voice messages from Darcy, who is furious about his plagiarized article. Darcy reveals she's now taking the same Bermuda Triangle route to complete the assignment herself. Embarrassed and unwilling to return to New York, Gulliver decides to stay in Lilliput permanently. Edward, jealous of Gulliver's growing popularity, tells the king he suspects Gulliver of dishonesty. The king dismisses Edward's concerns, trusting Gulliver completely. To solidify Gulliver's role, the king names him the new general and demotes Edward to vice-general. Furious, Edward secretly disables Lilliput's defense system, allowing Blefuscia to launch a surprise attack. The Blefuscian soldiers and their king take advantage, approaching by sea and bombarding Lilliput with cannonballs. As the new general, Gulliver nervously steps into the water to face the attackers. Despite his fear, his massive size renders the cannonballs ineffective. He splashes water to fend off the Blefuscians and ultimately defeats them. Gulliver's bravery saves Lilliput, solidifying his place as the kingdom's hero. For the first time in his life, he feels like he truly belongs. The people of Lilliput go out of their way to make Gulliver feel at home. They build a model of Times Square, change their clothes to match his, and even appoint soldiers to cut his hair and give him massages. Meanwhile, Edward grows increasingly frustrated. One night, he barges into Princess Mary's chamber, claiming it's his right to visit her anytime because he is courting her. However, the princess finally admits she doesn't love him and no longer wants him to court her. Furious, Edward storms off to Blefuscia, seeking the king's help. Edward's men find the Build Your Robot book that Gulliver had on the boat, and the Blefuscan king agrees to help him build a robot to defeat Gulliver. Days later, Gulliver enjoys the model Times Square when the palace bells ring, signaling an invasion. Gulliver prepares to defend Lilliput from tiny invaders but is shocked when a giant robot, operated by Edward, appears before him. Edward challenges Gulliver to a duel, and though Gulliver tries to fight, the robot is much stronger. The robot picks Gulliver up by his pants and forces him to admit defeat. Gulliver also confesses that his story about being the president was a lie. Both the king and the princess are stunned by the betrayal. As punishment, Edward sends Gulliver to a forbidden place known as the island where we dare not go. There, Gulliver is captured by a giant little girl who mistakes him for a toy. She takes him to her Barbie house and dresses him in pink clothes, treating him as her doll. Back in Lilliput, Darcy's body washes ashore, and Gulliver, who had told everyone she was his princess back home, explains her arrival. Edward recognizes her and imprisons her, along with King Theodore and the Queen, who have been captured since Gulliver's defeat. When Horatio sees this, he decides to travel to the island where we dare not go to rescue Gulliver. He manages to reach Gulliver, who is still trapped. On the island, Gulliver finds a skeleton of a dead U.S. Air Force pilot and uses the parachute to escape. He flies back to Lilliput, determined to make things right. First, Gulliver visits Darcy in prison and admits he has a crush on her. Darcy forgives him for plagiarizing the article, and they start to open up to each other. Gulliver, now genuinely wanting to help Lilliput, decides to challenge Edward to a duel. The next day, They face each other in battle. Gulliver demands that if he wins, Edward will return the kingdom to King Theodore, but if he loses, Edward will destroy it. The fight begins, and Edward quickly overpowers Gulliver. Horatio rushes to help and manages to sneak inside Edward's robot. From within, he defeats Edward, shutting down the robot. Gulliver, now free, easily defeats Edward. The crowd cheers, and Darcy celebrates the victory. Thanks to Horatio's bravery, he's allowed to court Princess Mary, and the two share a kiss. Just then, Edward, driven to madness, takes Princess Mary hostage. But she's had enough of him and beats him up. Darcy kisses Gulliver for the first time. Though the Blefuscan king and King Theodore are about to resume the war, Gulliver steps in to stop them, bringing peace to Lilliput once and for all. Gulliver successfully helps bring peace between the rival island nations by quoting Edwin Starr's song War. Finally, he and Darcy return to New York City on their repaired ship. A few weeks later, Gulliver has quit his job in the mailroom and is now working as a travel writer. He and Darcy are in a happy, loving relationship. Gulliver has just finished a travel assignment, and the movie ends with him and Darcy walking out of her office, holding hands. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe for more content, turn on notifications, and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching!